I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by our great friends at the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Chris Edwards. So happy to be back with David for year two here on our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. On our weekly show in 2024, DG and I are mostly looking ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from the previous week's schedule. My guy DG, now in his 38th year covering college football here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. And DG, we're going to break some news here as we start the show today. One of the first college football Saturdays in the last 3+ decades where you're not covering a game, not hosting a tailgate tour, and you may not even see a snap of college football this week.
Yeah, Chris, this is exciting, and I'm glad I'm able to share it on our platforms here. A lot of folks who know me from variations of our platforms know that I've often shared a lot about my family over the years. My wife, the lovely and talented Maria, as I still call her, but also just as a soccer coach to my son, Anthony, my daughter, Avery, Anthony being the proud ECU grad, Avery being the proud App State grad to be. And the big news is that my son, Anthony, is getting married to his fiancée, Sydney, here in Raleigh, North Carolina this Saturday. They are both proud grads of ECU and Millbrook High School in Raleigh. So it's going to be a family affair, of course. I don't know the last Saturday where I did not watch a single snap of college football, but that will be the case this Saturday. So hopefully I'm up to speed by our show for next week, given all the family in town and the festivities of the weekend. And I have a quick request, Chris, since you were kind enough to ask about this personal angle. You are aware of this, but some sad news to share that she has already shared publicly, as has Maria on her social media pages. So I feel that I'm okay. No HIPAA violation if I share this news with our audience. But my daughter-in-law-to-be, Sydney, has shared with the world, unfortunately, her recent diagnosis of Hodgkin lymphoma, which is apparently the most common form of cancer among young people. It is very treatable. There are a lot of success stories. It is not a death sentence or anything like that. But anyone who would like to forward our way their prayers, their well wishes, their positive energy, we take it in any form, religious or not. And now would be the right time for that as Anthony and Sydney embark on this new journey together we call marriage, but also under some tricky circumstances medically. So we often talk about how there are things important way beyond the sports world. This is one of them, and we thank folks in advance for all the support that we can get.
Yeah, certainly wishing them all of our best and our happiness this weekend. Let's turn the action on the field, DG. We'll look ahead at some of the big games. We're going to, of course, talk about some of the big developments last week, including the much-needed wins for App State, for East Carolina, for UNC, and for Wake Forest. We look ahead first to this week's action because in Week 10, there are a few intriguing in-state matchups among some teams that are in action. We get to those right away, but we're going to save one very big game for our national conversation, which comes up a little bit later. This segment, of course, brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family and their growing family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. Learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. DG, we'll start with the Tar Heels that win last week up in the Commonwealth over Virginia. Mac Brown's team 4-4 on the road this week at 1-7 Florida State. 3:30 kick on Saturday in Tallahassee. This, of course, on ACC Network. The Tar Heels, a 2-point favorite in Florida's capital city.
Yeah, just as it was strange, Chris, to see Duke earlier this season as a football favorite over the Seminoles, it is strange to see the Tar Heels as a football favorite over FSU, especially with this game being played, as you said, in Tallahassee. The Blue Devils, remember, had been 0-22 all-time against Florida State on the gridiron, but they finally ended that eternal offer a couple weeks ago with that 23-16 victory in Durham, as the Devils' outstanding defense put the clamps on what has been a truly horrific FSU offense this season. Carolina's all-time head-to-head record against the Seminoles is not quite as bad, but it is still plenty awful. 3 wins, 17 losses, 1 tie. The 3 victories, for the record, came first under Coach John Bunting, great friend of the program, back in 2001, when the Heels put a 41-9 whooping on FSU in Chapel Hill. More recently, it was 37-35 Tar Heels under Butch Davis in 2010, when our friend Casey Barth kicked a field goal in the final minute. And then 37-35 again under Larry Fedora on that famous Nick Weiler 54-yard tomahawk chop field goal as time expired at Doak Campbell Stadium in 2016, which at the time, in that case, snapped Florida State's 22-game home winning streak. Those 2 more recent, both of them UNC victories, did happen at Doak Campbell, the site of this week's game. The good news for this 2024 edition of the Tar Heels is what you mentioned a second ago. Coming off their first open week, they played by far their most complete game of this season last Saturday during that 41-14 domination of Virginia in Charlottesville. Carolina's 5th-year senior quarterback, Jacoby Criswell, played one of the best games of his entire college career with almost 300 passing yards, 2 touchdown passes, 0 turnovers. Omarion Hampton, as usual, ran for more than 100 yards, had 2 TDs. Wide receiver J.J. Jones, another guest on the David Glenn Show, as was Omarion not long ago, had more than 100 receiving yards in Jones's case and 2 touchdowns. One, that spectacular highlight reel grab in the end zone, and the other, an impressive catch and run. Both UNC lines dominated the trenches against the Cavaliers, which is not something the Heels have done often this season against anybody. The defense at UNC welcomed back its best player, the edge rusher Kamen Rucker, who has missed most of the season with an injury. He had 3 sacks and an interception, and anyone who likes fat guy pick sixes, Javari Ritzie had one of the best you will ever see from a big guy. He took it 84 yards in interception for a defensive touchdown. Now, against Florida State, which has the worst rushing offense in the ACC and the worst rushing defense in the ACC, there are 2 key questions for the Heels. One, can they dominate the line of scrimmage against FSU the way they just did against UVA and the way so many others have done against the Seminoles this season? That, again, has not been Carolina's greatest strength this season, not even close to it. Number 2, can the Heels defense successfully harass, disrupt, confuse, or maybe even intimidate Florida State's very young and very shaky QB rotation of redshirt freshman Brock Glenn, no relation, and the true freshman Luke Kromenhoek, who gave the Seminoles offense a little bit of a spark against Miami during the Seminoles' 36-14 loss to the Hurricanes last week. But neither of those FSU QBs has been very good at all, and it's going to be up to the Tar Heels to exploit that if they're going to win in Tallahassee.
All right, game 2, Stanford leaving the farm, the Cardinal 2-6. They are at 4-4 NC State Saturday, a noon kick in Raleigh. The Wolfpack, a 9-point favorite at home. This game will air DG on ACC Network.
Yeah, before I get to the game, I'd like to encourage our viewers, listeners, readers to check out our one-on-one interview this week, very recently posted, with Wolfpack head coach Dave Doran. Just a day or so ago, I believe it came out. We got into everything, Chris, and Coach Doran is kind to let me pick his brain way beyond football. We got into the 2024 election day thoughts and observations. We got into his overall assessment of his full 12-year tenure and its ups and downs in Raleigh. We got into his reaction as a football coach in his mid-50s to the surprise recent retirement of UVA basketball coach Tony Bennett, who's in his mid-50s. We got into how Coach Doran and his wife Sarah have rallied around their son Jacob and contributed massive amounts of time and money to issues related to autism and other cognitive differences. We got into how he and his family, Coach Doran, have had to deal with some abusive feedback on social media and otherwise, including personal attacks, sometimes even from members of Wolfpack Nation. We've got into how he's managed a 7-4 record in the Wolfpack's head-to-head and very intense rivalry against the North Carolina Tar Heels. We got into the recent retirement of Wolfpack QB Grayson McCall, the rise of the true freshman QB CJ Bailey over the last couple of weeks, and even into Coach Doran's reflections on one of his former players and one of the best in NC State football history, linebacker Peyton Wilson, now with the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL, of course, who is actually going to be inducted into the Ring of Honor at Carter Finley Stadium on Saturday afternoon, which brings us to the game itself. It is pretty simple in my eyes. Stanford is the worst football team in the Atlantic Coast Conference right now. The Cardinal is last in scoring defense, giving up more than 31 points per game. They're next to last in scoring offense at only 19 points per game. Some of the Wolfpack statistical numbers are not all that pretty either, but that is mostly because of those blowout losses to Clemson and Tennessee earlier this season. Those two opponents, of course, have been ranked in or near the national top 10 for most of this year, and Stanford will offer nothing of the sort. Of the Pac's 4 remaining games, which also includes Duke next week, then an open week, then road trips to Georgia Tech and UNC, this Stanford matchup is by far the simplest. The Cardinals' defense is not bad against the run, but they have given up huge chunks to opposing quarterbacks all season long. So it is going to be up to that true freshman, CJ Bailey, to build on what I thought were by far the 2 best games of his very young career against Syracuse and California. In those 2 games, he completed about 70% of his passes. He threw for roughly 300 yards per game in those matchups. Those are impressive numbers. And, of course, Bailey has plenty of high-quality weapons around him. Wideouts Casey Concepcion, the Ohio State transfer Noah Rogers, the Wake Forest transfer Wesley Grimes, and plus the UConn transfer at tight end Justin Jolie, who I think is one of the best at that position in the entire ACC. Those guys do not have huge receiving numbers so far this season, in part because of the QB turmoil at NC State, but I think that trend will take a big step in a positive direction against Stanford on Saturday afternoon.
All right, game 3 of our opening segment, 6-2 Tulane at 3-5 Charlotte. Thursday night, nationally televised, 7:30 ESPN. This is the first ever regular season game for the 49ers on ESPN, but they do open up as a 16-point home underdog.
Yeah, and I think this one's worth mentioning, whereas it would usually not be, for a couple reasons, including that TV angle. In our state, I'd argue that at least 3 schools have pretty well-known brand names at the top level of college football. UNC and NC State, of course, are large public universities in a Power 4 conference, and App State is that 3-time FCS national champion and more recently the winningest Group of 5 football program in the entire nation over the last decade. The other in-state FBS programs, Duke, Wake Forest, East Carolina, and Charlotte, all have had, I'd argue, more valleys than peaks over the longer haul. And the 49ers' place in this universe specifically is especially complicated. Unlike even Duke, Wake, and ECU, which all have, to steal a Bruce Springsteen song title, glory days and plenty of gridiron legends to celebrate and a multi-generational fan base and tradition to build upon, Charlotte rebooted its football program only 11 years ago, and they have only 1 winning season and 1 bowl trip in their entire history. On top of that, whereas App State has an especially passionate following in the mountains of North Carolina, and ECU gets plenty of attention, good or bad, in eastern North Carolina, the 49ers are right there in Charlotte, our state's largest city, obviously, where their place in the sports pecking order locally there is far, far, far behind the NFL and the Carolina Panthers, the NBA and the Charlotte Hornets, all sorts of the locally based NASCAR teams and associated headlines in that sport, the relatively new Major League Soccer franchise, the Atlantic Coast Conference, which now has its headquarters in Charlotte, and maybe even a handful of other things. because there are a lot of Clemson fans and Southeastern Conference fans in the Queen City or near the Queen City, where the SEC network actually has its studios as well. So for the 49ers to play their first regular season football game ever on the main ESPN channel, not ESPN2, not ESPNU, not ESPN3 or Plus, it is a big deal. And I saw that ESPN is even going to broadcast an edition of its famous Sports Center program from the Charlotte campus on Thursday afternoon with the veteran studio host Matt Berry running the show. So that should be fun. I imagine the students will turn out well for that as well as the game. One more reason to get excited for those who don't follow the American Athletic Conference all that closely is that Tulane, the opponent Thursday night, the visitor, might be the best team in that league. So it is a fantastic opportunity for Charlotte coach Biff Poggi and his guys to maybe make a massive statement on national TV just a short time after they pushed Memphis, another quality team in the AAC, to the limit before falling 33-28 to the Tigers in Memphis. No disrespect to Army or Navy or anybody else, but the Green Wave is 4-0 in conference play so far, and at 6-2, their only losses were to Kansas State and Oklahoma teams that were nationally ranked at the time the 49ers played them. The Green Wave rather played them. Tulane is averaging more than 40 points per game, and the Green Wave has a sophomore running back named Makai Hughes, you'll see on Thursday night, who's about to surpass 1,000 rushing yards for the second season in a row. If the 49ers are going to have a chance in this one, they're going to have to slow down that Tulane rushing attack, and they will need a big night from their own quarterback, either the true freshman Deshaun Purdy or their original 2024 starter, Max Brown, who did recently return from that injury he suffered back in September when the 49ers lost to the Tar Heels in Chapel Hill.
As we wrap up this opening segment, DG, give me several games involving at least one in-state team that maybe deserves a brief mention this week.
Yeah, FBS level, 4-4 Old Dominion goes to 3-4 App State. The Mountaineers head coach Sean Clark is under fire right now, but his team did what it needed to do last week with that 33-26 victory over Georgia State, as the passing combination that you and I have highlighted all season, QB Joey Aguilar, wide receiver Caden Robinson, they led the way at Kid Brewer Stadium. Now it's another must-win home game for the Mountaineers this week against an ODU team that has played very good defense this season, because App State's schedule has even more difficult games a little further down the road. At the FCS level, number 21 ranked and 6-2 NC Central visits 5-2 South Carolina State. This is a Thursday night game on ESPN2. So it's a fun national TV spotlight for Coach Trey Oliver and the NC Central Eagles, who won the HBCU National Championship, remember, just a couple of years ago. And it may also be a matchup of the two best teams in the MEAC this year. So there are conference championship implications in that one as well. And then finally, at the Division II level, a couple of quick ones. Number 16 in the national rankings and now 8-0 Johnson C. Smith hosts 3-4 Fayetteville State in the Golden Bulls' final home game of the season, as they continue what could be the greatest campaign in the 100-plus year history of their program. Finally, an old in-state rivalry resumes with 6-1 Wingate, which just hosted our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus. 6-1 Wingate travels to number 12 nationally and 7-1 Lenoir-Rhyne. The winner of this one will be in great position to not only play in, but host the South Atlantic Conference Football Championship game in mid-November. And for anyone who hasn't seen our video about who would actually win a fight in nature between a bulldog and a bear, that was, of course, in honor of this matchup between the Wingate Bulldogs and the Lenoir-Rhyne Bears. Check that out on our social media, because a lot of fans had a lot of fun with that one.
That was really good stuff for sure. Stay with us. More of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, coming up in a moment on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players, who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the great folks at the North Carolina Pork Council. DG, diving right in to our ACC and National Week 10 look ahead. It's brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with all of your storage needs. You can learn more at EXCELMS. That's EXCELMS.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. Only 2 top 25 versus top 25 matchups on the Week 10 national schedule, DG. One of them is an all ACC affair, but let's start in the Big Ten. A clash there. 2 of the top 4 teams in the national rankings, about as big as you can get in college football, especially under the overhang of that expanded college football playoff to 12 teams this year. Maybe an elimination game. We'll see. Number 4, Ohio State. They're 6-1. At number 3, Penn State, 7-0 are the Nittany Lions. Fox says this game Saturday, noon start. Buckeyes 3-point road favorites in Happy Valley.
Yeah, as someone who grew up in Pennsylvania and followed Penn State football pretty closely through the Joe Paterno era and beyond, I can tell you that this was a pretty fairly even rivalry until at least the turn of the century. More recently, though, Ohio State has become an absolute juggernaut on the gridiron, and the Buckeyes have now won 7 straight games and 11 of the last 12 head-to-head against the Nittany Lions. Penn State coach James Franklin has posted 6 top 25 finishes and 1 Big Ten championship during his first 10 seasons in Happy Valley, including 4 top 10 campaigns, by the way. But the Buckeyes are 5-0 against the Lions under their 6th-year coach Ryan Day, who is seeking his 3rd Big Ten title and his 6th consecutive top 10 campaign at Ohio State. Penn State has the better record right now at 7-0, of course. This game is being played at Beaver Stadium, home of the Nittany Lions. So it says a lot that the visiting Buckeyes are a 3-point Vegas favorite in this one. More than the recent history of this rivalry, I think the line reflects the team's schedules to this point. You could debate the best team that Penn State has defeated so far this year, but the top candidates would be 6-2 Illinois, 5-3 Wisconsin, and 4-4 Southern Cal. So there's certainly not a heavyweight victim in there anywhere. On the other hand, Ohio State's lone defeat came by 1 point at Oregon, and the Ducks are now 8-0 and ranked number 1 in the nation. So that's certainly as quality a loss as you can take. At the same time, though, what's the Buckeyes' biggest win of this season? Maybe over a 5-3 Iowa team. The Buckeyes did dismantle the Hawkeyes 35-7. But just last week, remember, Ohio State barely got by 5-3 Nebraska in Columbus, and that was 21-17. Final thought on this one, neither squad puts an extreme amount of weight on the shoulders of its quarterback, thanks mainly because both have strong running games and elite defenses. But Penn State's starting quarterback, Drew Aller, who is, actually from the state of Ohio, which is a fun angle if he plays, excuse me, Aller is questionable with a knee injury. Regardless, these are two of the top 8 scoring defenses in the country, with the Buckeyes giving up about 12 points per game and the Nittany Lions only about 14 points per game. So nobody is going to be surprised if this is another one of those old-fashioned, low-scoring, Big Ten-style grinders of a game on Saturday.
All right, back to the ACC now. We're 6-2 Duke off that loss to SMU last week. The Blue Devils on the road at number 8 Miami. The Hurricanes a perfect 8-0 on the season. This is a noon start on ABC. The Hurricanes a 20-point home favorite. This game kind of like an onion, DG. Got a lot of layers to it on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, you know me well enough to know I'm going to peel some of those layers for everybody. Obviously, to start, Miami is the huge favorite in this game, 20 points. And virtually nobody that I know is betting on the Blue Devils. But here's at least one fun factor worth watching in my eyes. With Heisman Trophy candidate Cam Ward, the preseason and probable postseason ACC Player of the Year at the controls, at quarterback, of course, the Miami Hurricanes have truly the most prolific offense in all of college football right now, statistically. They're averaging about 47 points per game, and they haven't scored fewer than 36 points in any of their 8 victories this season. Meanwhile, in my opinion, there has not been a better coached, better prepared, or more efficient unit this season in any of the 3 phases of the game than the defense of that first-year Duke coach, Manny Diaz, who came up the coaching ranks, remember, as a defensive guru and has led a bunch of great groups on that side of the ball at multiple schools, including as the DC at Penn State over the last couple of years. These Blue Devils are giving up only 18.6 points per game. That ranks second in the ACC behind only the Cal Bears. And only one Duke opponent has scored more than 21 points this season. That was SMU just last week, which scored 28 points on the Devils, but also turned the ball over 6 times against that Duke defense as SMU survived in a 28-27 nail-biter in Durham. So when Miami has the ball on Saturday afternoon at Hard Rock Stadium, you are going to see a brilliantly executed and creative and talented offense against a brilliantly game-planned and executed defense. So that'll be fun to watch. In addition, of course, back to those onion layers, this game represents a homecoming of sorts for Manny Diaz. He was born and raised in Miami. He was a 3-sport athlete as a young guy at a Miami high school. His father is the former mayor of the city of Miami. Manny was the Hurricanes defensive coordinator under Mark Richt from 2016 through 2018. He was the Hurricanes head coach from 2019 through 2021. So this is a U2 style sort of homecoming. Nice musical reference for you. Manny went 16-9 in ACC games there and had a top 25 season with the Canes in 2020, but he got fired at the end of the 2021 regular season when the Canes finished 7-5. Obviously, after those 2 seasons I mentioned, he was the coordinator at Penn State. Duke decided to give Diaz, who still is only 50 years old, another shot as a head coach, and the early returns there have been fantastic. The Devils got off to their best start since 1994, remember, and now they're 6-2 after that nail-biter defeat against SMU. Duke has not been great offensively this season, which may be the biggest reason an upset scenario is highly unlikely in South Florida. But regardless of what happens this week, the Devils appear to have had a super smooth coaching transition from Mike Elko to Manny Diaz. And if the Devils do lose, it won't be because of a lack of preparation.
How about this all top 20 showdown in Dallas on Saturday night? 7-0 Pitt, number 18 in the country, at number 20 SMU, 7-1, also unbeaten in the ACC. 8 o'clock ACC Network on Saturday night. Mustangs a 7-point favorite at home in Dallas.
Yeah, you've used this phrase a while back, but this is essentially an ACC-style elimination game between 2 teams that still have perfect records, both in conference play, along with obviously Clemson and Miami. The winner of this one will remain in contention for a trip to the ACC championship game and maybe even an unexpected bid to the college football playoff, as crazy as that sounds. The loser of this game can still have a plenty good season but probably will not be a serious candidate for either of those lofty goals. Coach Pat Narduzzi is in his 10th season at Pitt. And remember, this is a great trivia question. He is the only coach at a school other than Clemson or Florida State that has won an ACC football championship since the year 2010, when Frank Beamer led Virginia Tech to the ACC title. Narduzzi's Panthers went 11-3 in 2021, and they took home the program's first and only ACC championship that year. On the SMU side, former Miami assistant coach Rhett Lashley is in his 3rd season as the head coach of the Mustangs, who are off to a stellar start in the ACC after, remember, last year going 11-3 and winning the American Athletic Conference Championship a year ago. Both Pitt and SMU have been really good this season, among other things, forcing the other team to try to throw the football. The Mustangs and the Panthers are the top 2 run defenses statistically in the ACC this year. Each is giving up less than 3 yards per carry, although that is going to be put to the test this week because each team also has both a mobile quarterback and one of the top running backs in the league. SMU has tailback Brashard Smith on Miami Hurricanes transfer, and Pitt has Desmond Reed, the Western Carolina transfer that we've talked about on this show all season long and even last year. Because they're both also good receivers out of the backfield, Smith and Reed are 2 of the top 3 ACC players this season in all-purpose yards, along with the UNC All-American Omarion Hampton. At quarterback, meanwhile, SMU has Kevin Jennings, who's the more dangerous runner of these 2 guys, while Pitt has the redshirt freshman Eli Holstein, who is the more productive passer and has a wider variety of weapons in his receiving core. I think Pitt is the slightly better team in this one, but SMU is on its home field in Dallas. The crowd is going to be sky high, so this should be a fantastic matchup for ACC fans and really anybody who likes college football.
All right, we'll call another timeout. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, in a moment on the North Carolina Sports Network.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. DG diving right in to our coaches and quarterback segment, brought to you by our good friends at Lawson Insurance, who this week celebrate their 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with all of their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken, Miller, and Michael Lawson. Like all of us, they're huge sports fans. Give them a call at 919-846-2090 or search Lawson Insurance online. DG, last week we talked all about coaches. So this week we're going to mix in some quarterback in the conversation as well. We'll start with the QBs. 5 of our 7 FBS teams here in the Old North State have used multiple starting quarterbacks this season, and many have lost their original starting quarterback for the season due to injury. Now, when you think of the rest of this season, but also peering into your crystal ball and looking ahead to next season, I'm curious, what in-state school do you think is best prepared or best positioned at that important quarterback position moving forward?
Well, let me start this answer by making clear that no FBS school in our state already has a surefire star on its projected 2025 depth chart at the quarterback position. Remember when ECU had a Jeff Blake or a David Garrard as a returning senior, or NC State had a Phillip Rivers or a Russell Wilson, or Carolina recently had a Sam Howell or a Drake May as a returning starter, or even a Daniel Jones not too long ago at Duke. There are other examples, of course, at our other in-state programs too. Only then could a coaching staff kind of exhale a little bit and worry more about building some depth behind those experienced superstars on the quarterback depth chart. But in my eyes, the 2 most productive and reliable quarterbacks this year in our state have been Joey Aguilar at App State and Hank Bachmeier at Wake Forest. And guess what? Both of those guys are exhausting their eligibility this year. So we're probably going to enter next season with a whole bunch of serious questions at the QB position and at a whole bunch of those in-state schools you're asking about. Now, all of that said, I would argue that the 3 triangle programs, Duke, State, and Carolina, have seen at least competent play at QB and gradual improvement from their current starters, all of whom do have remaining eligibility. Malik Murphy, the Texas transfer, has 2 years of remaining eligibility at Duke beyond the current 2024 season. The Devils have leaned much more heavily on that defense I described earlier this year, so Murphy does not have overwhelming numbers, but you can't argue with his 6-2 record as Duke's starter, and he has 17 TD passes against only 5 interceptions. So Duke has to feel good about that, not only the rest of this year, but going into next season. At NC State, true freshman C.J. Bailey has stepped up in the aftermath of Grayson McCall's repeated injuries and recent retirement from football. Bailey just played the 2 best games of his college career back-to-back against Syracuse and Cal, throwing for about 300 yards a game, completing about 70% of his passes. That is a great sign for the future. And obviously, as a true freshman, Bailey has 3 full seasons of eligibility remaining beyond this one. Finally, at Carolina, it is not hard to imagine a preseason competition next year between the Tar Heels' original 2024 starter, the Texas A&M transfer Max Johnson, who suffered a season-ending injury in the opener at Minnesota, and their current starter, Jacoby Criswell, who is a 5th-year senior right now, but also still has 1 additional year of eligibility remaining because he started his career in college back during that COVID season of 2020. I am not sure if any of those triangle QBs is so outstanding that you should automatically ignore the transfer portal during the offseason. But in all 3 cases, the Devils, the Pack, and the Heels have seen good enough things from players who are eligible to return in 2025.
All right, switching back to the coaches now. We've already seen one of our in-state head coaches get dismissed in the middle of the season, Mike Houston getting fired at East Carolina a couple of weeks ago. How many other in-state coaches could end up on the hot seat as we enter November, the final month of the regular season?
Yeah, I think the short answer is 2. Sean Clark at App State, most obviously, and then perhaps a Mac Brown at UNC in a different way. As we've discussed on previous shows, if Coach Clark has his 2nd poor season in 3 years, which right now, as the Mountaineers are 3-4, with several difficult games still ahead, appears very likely, I don't think he will see year 6 as the head coach in Boone. It's a very difficult situation. Coach Clark is a great guy. That's his own alma mater. But App State won or shared 4 straight Sun Belt titles from 2016 through 2019, 3 under Scott Satterfield, 1 under Eli Drinkwitz. And the Mountaineers have had only 2 non-winning seasons in the past 30 years, with one of those 2 being under Coach Clark just 2 years ago. That is the standard in Boone, and barring an impressive finish this year, the Mountaineers will fall short of that standard for the 2nd time in the last 3 years. At many schools here in North Carolina and elsewhere, you definitely can get away with a couple of mediocre records. At App State, in the sport of football, you can't. And that's why Sean Clark has one of the hotter seats in all of FBS football right now. At Carolina, I'll simply remind people of this. The conversation around 73-year-old Mack Brown will be night and day different if he somehow finishes 8-4 versus, say, 4-8. Those are not slightly different scenarios. The former hypothetical would involve a decent bowl game, a chance to get to 9 victories, and that would be an excellent season, all things considered. And it theoretically would enable Brown to keep his staff intact, extend his legendary recruiting magic for at least a little while longer, etc. The latter scenario, 4-8, would be Carolina's worst season since they went 3-9 and then 2-9 in 2017 and 2018, leading to the dismissal of Coach Larry Fedora, a guy who had 5 pretty solid and often entertaining seasons in Chapel Hill prior to those 2 horrible years. In all likelihood, of course, against a remaining schedule that includes this week's road trip to Florida State, a later trip to Boston College, and home games against Wake Forest and NC State, the Heels easily could end up at 6-6, which still would qualify them for Brown's 6th consecutive bowl game during this second tenure of his in Chapel Hill. But it would also put an extraordinary amount of pressure on UNC Athletic Director Bubba Cunningham and his advisors regarding whether a then 74 years old next summer Mack Brown would be the right guy to try to take Carolina to that elusive next level on the gridiron.
All right, one more time out to burn. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com. The Original Salt Works has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets, or special recipe grits for breakfast, or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. Now, the focus of This Week in College Football will be forward-looking as often as possible this year, but we're always going to take a glance back at the previous weekend in college football as well. With that thought in mind, we bring you our quick glance back to Week 9, brought to you by our great friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days out of the year. And right next door, you'll find King Neptune. That's become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. Keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. DG, Week 9 offered some intriguing developments beyond what those we've already discussed, including a few games that we previewed on our show last week, like UNC's win at Virginia, App State's victory over Georgia State, ECU triumphing over Temple, and, of course, Wake Forest winning on the road at Stanford. What were your biggest takeaways from last week when even the losses by Charlotte and Duke were really tight games?
Yeah, the number one thing to me, Chris, is that everyone is still fighting and playing hard. Most fans will keep going to games and or watching their favorite team on TV as long as they're still playing hard and showing they still care, and as long as it's still an entertaining product, maybe even if the records are mediocre sometimes. And this year, obviously, other than 6-2 Duke, our state's FBS teams are having a very hard time rising above mediocrity, but they're still playing hard, still having fun, and in several cases, they're getting better from week to week. This past weekend, obviously, the caliber of the competition did help. It always does. But UNC played its most complete game of the season in that dominating 41-14 win at Virginia. We discussed those details earlier. Meanwhile, East Carolina had its most dominating FBS victory of the season while playing under interim head coach Blake Harrell, who was elevated from defensive coordinator after the Pirates fired Mike Houston at midseason. ECU quarterback Caden Hauser, the Michigan State transfer who's been the backup most of the season, threw 5 touchdown passes in the Pirates' biggest offensive explosion of the past 2 seasons combined, as the Pirates beat the Owls 56-34 at Dowdy-Ficklen Stadium. Wake Forest struggled a bit at Stanford, maybe more than we expected, but the 3 guys we highlighted last week, QB Hank Bachmeier, running back Damon Claiborne, and wide receiver Taylor Morin, all made huge plays when the Deacons needed them, as the Deacs claimed that cross-country road victory 27-24 and perhaps stayed on track for bowl eligibility at 4-4 now. Finally, as we mentioned earlier, Joey Aguilar and Caden Robinson came up huge for App State against Georgia State, as the Mountaineers finally got to play in front of the home fans at Kid Brewer Stadium for the first time since Hurricane Helene. We haven't had a lot of weeks this season where every in-state FBS team that played performed fairly well to extremely well, and that was the case this past week, even with, as you said, Duke's close loss to SMU or Charlotte's close road loss to a pretty good Memphis team. And that just feels somehow like a small but important step in the right direction for college football here in the great state of North Carolina.
All right, as we wrap things up, you and I last week talked about our best in college football, best season in college football in North Carolina, had that extensive conversation. And DJ, you posted an update to the best college football season in our state at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. 33 in-state NCAA football teams in North Carolina. Of those 33, how many of them are legitimate contenders for the 2024 version of the best college football season in North Carolina right now?
I'd say we're down to 5.
No,
and I think by the end of this coming weekend, we may be down to 3 or 4. And I'm glad you used the words that way, Chris. Sometimes people think best football team in North Carolina, and if we give it to a D2 school or somebody, they're rolling their eyes saying, well, that team couldn't have beaten even a mediocre State or Carolina team or whatever. We get that. That's why we call it the best college football season in North Carolina, the words that Chris used during that introduction. We're not claiming that they're the best team head-to-head necessarily. If a Division II team wins our best college football season title, we do not think that they could go to Chapel Hill and beat the Tar Heels or go to Raleigh and beat the Wolfpack, even if those 2 teams happen to be down in a given year. Anyway, with all that in mind, I'd say the 5 contenders do include 1 FBS team, 6-2 Duke, 1 FCS team, NC Central, ranked in the top 25 of the FCS ranks, and then 3 Division II teams. You have Johnson C. Smith, Lenoir-Rhyne, and Wingate. By the way, NC Central, Johnson C. Smith, and Lenoir-Rhyne are all ranked in their respective top 25s right now nationally. The Golden Bulls of Johnson C. Smith remain the most intriguing candidate for this year's honor because they're 8-0 and possibly in the process of the greatest season in the history of their program. They are still undefeated, which automatically makes you a great candidate for just about any honor, including best college football season in North Carolina. And at number 16 in the Division II poll, they currently have the highest ranking in the history of their program. That matters too. They also have a shot at the CIAA football championship, which they have won only 1 time 55 years ago, despite being a member of that league for almost 100 years now. So if J.C. Smith can keep winning, man, I don't know how you give this award to anybody else. However, there are other candidates. For example, Duke has had, Chris, only one 10-win season in its history in football and only one top 25 finish in the last 60-plus years. So if somehow Coach Manny Diaz in his first year can achieve either or both of those things this season, and it is possible, the Blue Devils automatically would rank among the top contenders for this year's best college football season in North Carolina honor. The Devils accomplished actually all of those things under David Cutcliffe in 2013. They went 10-4. They finished 22nd in the Associated Press poll, and they were, I believe that year, they shared our best college football season honor. We try to avoid ties, but occasionally we go that direction. Mike Houston actually led Lenoir-Rhyne in 2013 to the Division II National Championship game. So 11 years ago, Duke and Lenoir-Rhyne shared our best college football season in North Carolina title. And lastly, you used the phrase elimination game earlier. I did as well. Only the winner of this week's Division II throwdown and rivalry game between Wingate/Wingate. They tell me you're allowed to say it either way, so don't get mad at me. Wingate and Lenoir-Rhyne go head-to-head. They're both still in the running for our honor, but they play each other. So only the winner will probably remain on our short list of candidates. And NC Central, if they can somehow enjoy that national TV spotlight on Thursday night and beat South Carolina State, maybe the other best team in the MEAC, then the mighty Eagles, who were our best season in North Carolina 2 years ago when they won the HBCU National Championship, they would remain contenders as well. But, yeah, we're down to 5, and that list is dwindling as we enter November. So we might only have 2 or 3 candidates come the middle of this next month.
We'll revisit this topic again for sure. I guarantee it. All right, that's going to do it for our show this week. Huge thank you to the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. And thanks to Atlantic Tire and Service, now with 6 locations in the Triangle, as being one of our newest sponsors. A quick reminder, DG and the staff posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com. They have direct links on the homepage to this YouTube channel, the wide variety of places you can find on-demand audio and podcast of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all of our other offerings, and updates on year 2 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which, as DG mentioned, had a great stop last week at Irwin Belk Stadium in Wingate, North Carolina, for the 6-1 Bulldogs homecoming win over the Catawba Indians. Please check out our social media accounts, our website, for information about our tailgate tour stops coming up in November and in December. So for DG, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks so much for joining us again this week for This Week in College Football with David Glenn, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.